Hello, and welcome to the show, the last show of 2020. So I'll be off for the next 2 weeks, but today we're going to try to sum up the year. And I'm going to need your help for that because there was a lot that happened. And instead of spending 4 hours combing the internet, reading all the blog posts from the Kubernetes blog, the CNCF blog, the Docker blog, I thought we'd do it together. So I have a list of things that I came up with in about an hour that are specifically to Docker, mostly Docker and Docker tooling, a little bit of Kubernetes, the major stuff that I cared about in Kubernetes. And I'm sure I missed stuff. So you're going to help me make this list better. And then I'm going to figure out how to make it into something more compact. Like we're going to, shove this into a shorter YouTube video, maybe a blog post or something, maybe a course update for those that are in my courses so that you can get the sort of the 20 or 30-minute version of this instead of an hour. But let's get into it. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. If you haven't been here before, this is something I do every Thursday, talking about Docker, Kubernetes, container stuff. Basically my job, which is to train people on this and then to help companies use it. So maybe you have a job like that. Maybe you are a user or you're just a personal fan of these tools and you're here to check them out. So a couple of things you can do. One, show up here every week, like and subscribe, all the YouTube thingies. Everybody, it's a reminder, but we all have to say it because we forget. If you're interested in following along on my Patreon stream, so Patreon's where I basically announce like all the new what the new live shows are going to be, when I'm going to do Hangouts in Zoom or in Discord with my with what we call the high fivers, which is a thing you can get here. If you buy me a coffee a month, you can join in on some of those exclusive benefits. But you don't have to pay. You can just click the follow button down there on patreon.com/Bret Fisher. You can click the follow button and you can get all of my notifications. Essentially, it's like the private stream of everything I'm updating or creating. And we've also I've been working on some stuff for the courses, as well as modernizing some of the major Docker samples. So if you've taken any of my courses, you've been in my conference workshops, if you've seen some of my videos here, you know that I use some samples. Dog versus cat is a common one I use. The voting app essentially is what that's called. There are other Docker samples, and those are getting out of date. Some of those are years out of date. So I'm working with the Docker captains. We're coming up with a plan on how we're going to refresh a lot of that stuff that everybody likes, including the visualizer. In case you're a Swarm fan, if you've ever used the Docker visualizer. So we're going to get those updated rather, and maybe update them to a little more full featured. It's going to take some time, and that's going to be a lot of work, but that's one of the things I've been working on lately, as well as hanging out in our Discord chat. We've had all sorts of stuff going on. So you can get this at devops.fan. That little link right above me. And one of the links here today, let's see, where was it? Makuni Cow is showing us some more of the Linux training, this time on Service Mesh from the Linux Foundation. So they've been putting out some courses this year. They've got like a beginner, a small little course on Kubernetes. And some of these courses are free. Some of them are not. You tend to be able to get the free training, but you don't get the sort of certification and testing or whatever without paying. So this is pretty interesting if you're into Surface Mesh. That's pretty advanced stuff. That's definitely not something you want to do your first week of Kubernetes. So you need to learn Docker, you need to learn Kubernetes, then you implement Kubernetes, and then you figure out that, hey, maybe my organization is mature in its DevOps, I'm mature in our distributed microservice architecture, and I want to take it to the next level. That's where Service Mesh is at, and Linkerd is one of them. So you can get a course there. I will throw that into chat. And before we start knocking out the hits, let me get to some chat questions. So hello, everyone. India, Egypt, Netherlands, UK, Dallas, Fort Worth, Disney World. Nice. All right, so bikers in Disney World. That is a place, so that does count. India, New Jersey, and Uros or Pickle Rick. The answer to Docker captains, I don't, 50, something like that. I think there used to be 70 at one time, but, and there's probably some that are still captains that are not super active, and there's some new captains that are picking up the ball and running with it. Just like Corsair, which you sometimes see on this show, in the chat. So yeah, people like that. All right, let's just jump into it. No time to waste. And I have a running list. Probably should make this public. And let's see, share to web. Allow comments. All right, I'm going to post a link in chat. If you want to log into Notion, it's one of my note-taking apps. So in Notion, get that there? Yeah. So if we just talk about Docker Engine, there was a major release a week ago, and that is, they announced it over here on the blog. It's already 4 posts down because there's been so much else that we're going to talk about, including the new open beta of the M1. In case you have a Mac M1, you can now just download it from their website. I just tweeted about that 10 minutes ago. So 2010, the 2010 release, to me, 3 big things. Actually, the biggest one is just to support the major new releases of Linux. And that, on the Yum side of things, on the CentOS side of things, the Red Hat side. So Fedora and CentOS now, because they come with cgroups v2, Docker now supports cgroups v2, which is a core kernel feature in Linux that we needed v2 to get some new things in Docker, including rootless. I'm going to say exited beta. So rootless, so you now can run Docker as a daemon as a regular user. You could technically do that before, but now it's officially released. It's no longer experimental or beta. All right. So CentOS, Fedora, latest releases. The new Docker logs command now works with all logging drivers. Before it only worked with the default. Now it works with all of them in the open source version. So for those of you that need a pinch, need the Docker logs command, you can do that. And then Docker service create now got a jobs mode. So you can execute jobs, which is basically one-off things that will run and finish and stop. You can now do that in Swarm. There's a lot more going on with Docker, but that when we talk about the engine, the core daemon, that was mostly it. There was a lot of little other fixes, and I might be missing a thing or two. So if you catch me on missing a thing in chat, help me out. So that was 2010. Not a huge thing in terms of the daemon when it comes to new fancy features in the daemon. Most of what Docker is focusing on this year is adding experience to the developer on the local machine. So there's a lot of other Docker features that we'll talk about, but those are largely about Docker Desktop, Docker Compose, things on your local machine. But when it comes to the 2010 release, that's just the engine. And there was not, to me, a lot of that was catching up from a year and a half of not adding any new features or not rolling up bug fixes into a single new release, a new major release, at least. Technically minor release, but they're not using Semver, so we'll just assume it's major. Let's see, networking Udemy class. No, I do. I would love to do networking. There's like 100 classes I love to do. I will probably never get to a networking class because there are already so many networking courses out there, and I just can't imagine when I'm going to get the time to do that. I want to do an advanced compose. I want to do a DevOps for managers. I want to do a GitOps. I I haven't finished the entire Kubernetes course yet, so we got to finish that. And then there's updates to other courses, and there's lots needs to happen. So sadly, I probably won't get to that one. But if you have a good recommendation on networking courses that you've taken and you like them, sure, mention them in chat. You probably can't add links, but you can at least describe it so people can find it on Google. Where can I find some practice questions with regards to Docker and Kubernetes? GitHub. If you're looking at the certifications, most people that I see putting up guides, you just Google for them, and there'll be practice questions on GitHub. There are some Udemy courses you can buy that will essentially take those questions and put them in a class format, but as far as I'm concerned, you can get all those questions on GitHub, which is why I don't do that in my courses, because there's pretty good community feedback onto stuff in GitHub. So let's see. And a question in regards to Backup. So Backup is one of my open source tools that I released this year. It basically uses Docker volumes as a very simplistic backup tool to copy stuff out of volumes into images or externally to your host. You can just look up backup, probably, because I'm not sure anyone else is using that word. You have a quick question on backup. When I try to export a volume, it works well. However, when importing it back into tar.gz format, it does not auto-create volume. Any clue? I would say post an issue in that repo. And if I haven't, if you have, go into that GitHub repo, post an issue, give me an example that I can actually reproduce your problem, and I will get to you later. And if you've done that and I haven't seen it, apologies. You might want to just mention me in that issue, and I will try to help you out. Yeah, we're going to totally get to Docker Desktop 3.0. Seems like Docker reached mature stage. Will it step aside for other tools in a few years? Well, it depends on what you mean by Docker. Docker has probably a dozen tools at this point. So which exact tool are you referring to? Talking about the CLI, the daemon, Docker Desktop, Compose? What are you talking about? I would say no. Docker has not. I'd say Docker the engine on servers, running on servers to run containers. That is mature, right? We're not going to see revolutionary new things in that. But Docker has added multiple major new features to the command line this year, to the desktop, to the Compose stuff, that we're going to go through all that. But they're expanding beyond the engine. The engine was the first thing they created way back in 2013, right? They created this engine and a CLI to talk to it. And its goal was to package or build and run containers on a server and then also on your local machine. That was it. Your local machine had to be Linux. So that part is mature. And we're not going to see totally new ways to run containers with Docker in a server. What we're seeing this year are features like automatically running it on Azure ACI, or automatically one line deploying your containers to AWS's ECS. We've seen all these types of things coming out. We've seen one-liners to automatically scan your images locally or in Hub. So there's all that stuff, but that's not in the daemon. That's not Docker D or Docker engine, right? That's developer tooling on the local machine. So it depends on what you mean. Yeah. So those things I just mentioned, those four things: the C groups, the rootless Docker, the CentOS Fedora, and the Docker logs. Those, to me, are the major things about the engine. Nothing crazy exciting unless you specifically fit in one of those four. Like you are on the latest Fedora and you can't run the latest Docker. Yeah, that was a problem. There was actually ways to get around it, but it required work. So let's talk about Desktop 3.0. So Docker Desktop is a bundling of many things. It is not just Docker, the command line. It's actually probably half a dozen tools command line at this point. So I put the major ones here. Let's break it down. We'll go one by one. And then if you have questions, throw them in comments. I'll get to them as I get to the end of the list. So we have the Docker Compose with a space. So let's actually zoom in there. Docker Compose with a space in there is a new feature. So now, if I go into like this directory where I have a compose file, I can now type Docker space compose space up. All right, so this is a brand new feature just shipped last week. So this is Docker taking compose, and which is previously Docker-compose coming out of Python and putting it into Golang built into the Docker CLI itself. So we'll no longer, in the future, we'll no longer need a separate compose tool. It'll be built into the Docker CLI. It's also going to use BuildKit by default. So when I do a Docker compose up here, and this is also another thing, is their YAML formatting is different. So I'm going to fix that right here so we can make this work. So the Golang YAML spec thingy requires true falses to be in quotes because they're strings in labels. I have to do this. That's really a YAML formatting that I was messing up, but it just happens to be a slight little difference. I've actually mentioned it to them, to the team. Check out. All right, so if I do a Docker compose up, duplicate mount point. Oh, am I doing? I don't have anything running. Let's see. It's just supposed to work. Come on. Come on. Mount point. That's an interesting thing. I don't have that problem by default. So this is beta, right? If I do a Docker compose up, okay, so that works. So I've already found another bug. So Docker space compose is going to use all the new features of Docker and be written in Go and bundled, and it will have new capabilities. So two of the new capabilities, essentially, and I'm going to kill that, the new capabilities of this Docker compose up, you've seen on this show earlier this summer, we actually had people on the show. We talked about two major new features that includes Docker. I essentially included these here. Deploying using that Docker compose up, using the Docker context. So you can change your context to use Azure ACI or AWS ECS. Neither one of those are technically Kubernetes, but ECS is an orchestrator. ACI is more like single containers on a single host kind of thing. But this is Docker allowing you to do Docker compose up, not Docker-compose, but Docker space compose up against Azure, against AWS, and directly deploying containers that way. So they're trying to make it easier. This is not what I would call production setups typically, unless you're just a single developer. If you're working in a team of people, these are probably not the ways you're going to deploy containers. You're probably going to deploy through a more GitOps approach or using CI/CD tools. You're probably going to have that. But these commands are designed to make it easier to spin up containers, deploy stuff when you just want simple projects and you're on simple workflows and you've only got one or two people that need to worry about this stuff. So, ECS is obviously a large solution that can handle enterprise workloads, but in a team, you normally want to have, stuff done in change management and going through CI/CD workflows and doing testing first and all that. So this new Docker compose up against something like ECS is great. It just may not scale to the size of an organization. That's why we have tools like Terraform, and we have mature tools that create infrastructure, manage your workflow, test things. Docker's not trying to replace all that. They're simply trying to make it easier for you to ship stuff. Now, what we all want is Docker context create DigitalOcean, Docker context create Google Cloud, like Google Cloud Run, for example. And so there's now conversations happening all inside of Docker's roadmap. You just go over to Docker. Let's see, it's at github.com/docker/roadmap/project/1. And you can see all of what they're working on and submit ideas and the most important thing is if you search stuff there that you like and thumbs up it, they will know that people care about it. For example, M1 support, another new feature that just landed yesterday. Docker now has a public beta of M1 support for Macs, which is pretty fast considering that we didn't even have, it was really hard to get the developer versions of M1s, and those only came out, 6 months ago. So where'd they go? Where'd it go? All the way at the top. So now, if you just go to Docker's blog, you can download the M1 preview, run it on your brand new M1 Mac if you have one. I do not. I don't have one yet. So, and you can run native ARM containers as well as x86 containers on ARM. It uses QEMU to run Intel-based, AMD x64 type setups that we've all been used to for 2 decades now. It can run those inside of emulation, which is the same thing it has done for years on Windows and Mac. It uses QEMU, which is a standard Linux emulator for different architecture types, and it allows you to mix and match. So just like on my Mac today, that's a regular old Intel Mac, I can run ARM 32-bit, ARM 64-bit. I can do all those things inside of Docker because it's using that Linux QEMU. Now you can do the opposite. And it actually, according to the people that have played with it, that because the M1s are so much faster, you don't see much, there's not much performance impact, especially if your Mac's a couple of years old. If you have like a 2017 Mac, you will probably notice that it's still faster to go through the emulation on a new M1. That's the impression I'm hearing from people. So, Eric's mentioning, a Kube.Academy a few months back. It was part of their Pro tier, which is free but requires registration. Not a deep dive tutorial, though. So networking, K8's networking, that's hard stuff. So yeah, if you're really into Kubernetes, I would highly recommend that. Having not even seen it, any networking course in Kubernetes is better than none because you can't just... Docker networking is not the same as Kubernetes networking. So you've got to learn that, yeah. So what are you using for getting suggestions of Docker options? I'm not sure what you mean there, Sudeep. Can you re-ask that question a different way? I'm not sure what that question means. So back to the list. Docker Scan happened earlier this year, which means you can now scan your local images as well as stuff in Hub with the Docker Scan command. So all of us, even without registering, get free scans of a certain, this is for CVEs, vulnerabilities in your images or any other images that you have locally. You can do a Docker Scan command, and it will use Sneak's services to scan that image either locally, or you can also load them up in the Hub. I think the Hub ones you have to pay for, and then you get more scans if you pay for Docker. Another thing with Docker this year that's not technically a feature, but Docker did change. So the way you pay for Docker now isn't just paying for Hub. You pay for Docker as a subscription to Docker, which I think was a fantastic idea. We don't want multiple subscriptions. Like, we just want all the Docker tooling in one thing. And I've been wanting this for years. I've been asking for it for years, and finally they have it. So what you get now is not just more storage and more pools in Docker Hub. Docker Hub is essentially a build tool. It's a CI and CD tool if you want it to be. So it's not the most advanced. It's pretty basic, but it uses Docker Compose. You can create Compose files that it will then use to test things and then create images. And then it can webhook whatever your CD tool of choice is if you want it to. Or you can have your GitOps tools like monitor the images or whatever. So it's pretty basic at this point, but I think they're going to keep adding features to that. So now you can pay, and a couple of things people aren't talking about is you now get more parallel builds, which if you think about it, in a lot of CI tools, you have to pay extra for more builds. That's usually like something on the internet. If you have a SaaS cloud product as your CI, you typically, the more builds you want to do concurrently, the more you have to pay. So with even just the $5 a month plan, you get two parallel builds, and then if you step it up to $7, you get 3. The other big thing that people don't know about is that as a part of this, they don't really talk about this yet, but you now get email support for Docker Desktop. So for just, I think it's $5 or $7 a month, you now can get email support from Docker. Sure, that's not like 24/7 phone call support. You might have to go, I think, to Marant. I don't know if you can do that with Docker at all. I think they might have this bigger plan for large companies that they make special pricing for that and get special packages. Someone may know on the call. I know they used to sell enterprise subscriptions, but I don't know that that's what they're doing now. But for us mere mortals and small teams, you can now actually get email support from Docker for just $5 a month, including Docker Desktop. So it's actually, I don't know, that's pretty amazing. I don't know how that scales. I don't know how that scales for $5 a month, but it's there. So that was all new this year, a Docker subscription. Um, Docker Hub tool. So this just came out, and we didn't even talk about it. And I don't think but there's this new tool, Docker. It's just Hub tool. It's going to eventually be rolled into Docker, I'm told, so that it won't be a separate tool. But for now, they're just iterating as a separate tool. And this is important because we haven't had, for the longest time, there's been no easy way with the official Docker command line to actually manage Hub and registries. You could push and pull, but there's lots of other things you couldn't do. You couldn't delete. You couldn't technically rename or retag unless you pulled something down, retagged it, and then pushed it all back up. That was really kind of weird. There are other tools out there. There's IMG. There's Reg CLI. We are actually going to have a show all about those tools next month. I hope next month. Actually, I don't think. I'm not going to say who's going to be on the show because I don't want to put any pressure. But as a Docker captain that hasn't been reached out to yet, that I'm going to be asking to come on the show, and we're going to talk all about those registry tools for command line. But Hub tool is out. You can check that out. That will help you manage your repos from the command line. It might also be another tool, as well as these other tools we'll talk about next month, for managing stuff in CI, maybe automating some of your image management in command lines and in scripts. So WSL2 support. Who forgot about that? Who forgot about WSL2 support? We got that at the beginning of summer. So this also, by the way, for some of you that may not know, includes back patches. So months later, Microsoft quietly released updates to all supported Windows 10 major versions. That's 1903, all the major older versions of Windows 10 that they currently support all now have a minor little patch release that gives WSL2 support to that version of Windows. And then that means you can run Docker Desktop, including home editions and again, anything that Windows 10 supports. So that is an indicator of something down here that I haven't talked about yet, which is the official sunsetting of Docker Machine and Docker Toolbox. We're going to talk all about that next month. I'm hoping to have a post about that. But if you actually went to Docker/Toolbox now on GitHub, you will notice that this repository has now been archived. So I'm a fan of this. Some of you that may be fans of Toolbox or have specific niche situations with Toolbox, you may say, "Oh no, not that! It's frozen. No more releases. No more." Here's the problem: there's 300 plus issues that aren't being addressed inside this app, and this Toolbox was always meant to be replaced by Docker Desktop, but Docker had to do a lot of things to do that. They needed some of this other tooling to replace some of the things that Docker Machine does. They needed better Docker Desktop support on modern versions of Windows. So they've done all of that. So what we want from Docker is more new stuff. We don't want them to maintain old, deprecated stuff that you should be replacing anyway. So I'm a fan of this because now we know Docker is no longer maintaining this. You can maybe get it to work if you want, and there are workarounds to make it work. But in almost all cases, like 99.9% of cases, there's no reason to use Toolbox. If you're running something like Windows 7, it's probably better that you just install a Linux VM and use that with VirtualBox or something. Like use a VM with VirtualBox. Using these other tools like this was a burden on the Docker team in recent years because they need to focus on all the new cool stuff, the cloud stuff they're doing, like with the ACI and the ECS and Kubernetes. And honestly, I don't want, if I get to vote on how much open source they work on, I'd rather them work on all that new cool stuff and not spend their time on what I would call legacy tooling like Docker Machine, Docker Toolbox. I'm sure there's other tools out there. Anyway, that's just my opinion. But I know that there's limited people, there's limited resources, and the more we get rid of old stuff, the more we can focus on new stuff. Anyway, so thank you to the team, Justin and the rest, for actually archiving this as a way to communicate. You can now see there's a message down here. I'm going to totally have something we're doing. We haven't figured out what we're going to do yet, but we're going to work on a show that basically gives you a guide. And maybe it's a blog post, maybe it's a Docker document in their docs that gives you a list of every different place you used to run Docker and how and where you should move that to, so that you know, hey, if I was using Docker Machine, I should probably, in this use case, I probably should move to, either a standard Linux VM or using something in Terraform, or maybe something easy like multipass for creating local VMs. It just all depends. And there's sort of a matrix that we've got to get to on how that all works together. Okay, before I keep going, I'm just going to check the questions. Let's make sure we... Oh, yeah, my shell. Yeah, that's just ZSH shell. Thanks, Pickle Rick. So the answer to the question, getting my suggestions and my Docker options, that's actually just ZSH. There's a couple of things going on there. That is command completion. You just Google bash completion or ZSH completion. And then part of that is also oh my ZSH. You can get all this stuff at bretfisher.com/shell. This is actually, I think it's still actually an up-to-date list. An up-to-date list of all the things I'm doing on my command line, including that preview stuff. It also shows my command history, so if I type something before, it'll prop it up again so I can see it. All right. So what do you recommend as a container host OS, keeping in mind the depreciation of Docker and Kubernetes? Deprecation. Jacob, it doesn't matter. If you're running... the problem is you're asking me for container host OS. I don't... So it depends on the tool. Are you running Nomad? Are you running Kubernetes? Are you running just Docker? Are you running ECS? Are you using a cloud? Like, what is the end goal? Because that's going to determine your OS. But the bottom line is, you don't need to use a container OS. Like, forget all of those. Use the OS that you like, the one you know. If you know Ubuntu or Debian or CentOS or Fedora, whichever one you prefer, that's the one for you. And Docker will work on all those, especially now that we've got this updated version, the 2010 release, that will work on the latest Fedora and the latest CentOS. So I have tried a lot of these minimal OSs, and for personal projects, you can play around with stuff all you want, but I don't see businesses en masse adopting container OSs. The value is not there. Like, what is... Okay, so maybe I get some memory and hard drive disk space back, but that's comes with a whole lot of caveats around how do I audit this thing? How do I security scan this thing? Do any of my tools work with this thing? And the answer in most of those cases is it's hard, it's different, and no. So I don't see people adopting that unless they're Google, unless they're running thousands of servers and they just need the thinnest, cleanest, minimal OS, and then maybe look at some of the container OSs. But me, I just use Ubuntu. I use honestly whatever the client or customer or student is asking for. So I like them all, but I tend to default to Debian-based OSs just because I'm more comfortable there. Yeah. Oh, by the way, anyone have any questions on Sneak? Eric is in chat and works at Sneak. Biker saying changes a lot for support. It's part of the enterprise license per node, 2 levels, regular and business critical, twice as expensive. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I've heard Docker say to me in like just conversation, someone at Docker saying something about enterprise support customers that they have. So when you go to their pricing page, they do have this fourth option that I don't know anything about because I'm not a partner. I don't sell Docker. Like, I'm just a community person. So, they have terms of service here, which is interesting that they don't on other versions. But this is all like, contact sales, right? So the fact that there's that just tells me that maybe there's some higher level, but I don't know. I just don't know. But yeah, Mirantis does provide a lot of Docker support. So the last two things really quick on this list before I get to some more questions was we now have GPU support. As of weeks ago, we now have GPU support on Windows with WSL2. And we also have a Docker Compose and Docker Dash Compose are now versionless. You can use them if you're not using Swarm, because Swarm I don't think supports versionless yet. But you basically can leave out the version in your files, and it will figure out all the things you've added in. It will figure out how to do them. So I haven't fully tested all this yet, but in theory, you could use features from the 2 branch and the 3 branch that were previously not able to be used together. You should be able to use extends, things like that were in 2. I haven't tested all that, but I do know that this is not a Swarm feature. This is Docker Compose, the command line feature. I don't know if it's coming to Swarm. I haven't heard anything back from the team on that. So, yeah. All right, so that is it to me for Docker Desktop. We've got Kubernetes to go through and Hub, if we want to talk about Hub, and then my wish list. So let's go back to questions real quick. Can you run multipass on a Mac without the UI? Absolutely. In fact, I don't ever use the UI. I install multipass with Brew, and I just use it from the command line right there. So, in fact, I think I used this last week when we did the Docker stuff. So, just multipass is right there, and I can do a list to see all my machines. And I cleaned up a bunch of old ones that weren't working, and I can shell into it. It does have a little GUI that you can run in your Mac bar or your Windows, toolbar kind of thing, but I don't do that. Archimedes has a good question. Docker Swarm does not have privilege mode, but it has capabilities now. Is privilege basically a shortcut for the full set of capabilities? Yes. So the capabilities are cap add, so that allows you to add security features to any container you're running. And this previously was only in Docker run, but now it's in Swarm as well. And the easy button when you just need to make something work is to use -- privilege in Docker. The problem is that's essentially the highest form of privilege. It's basically the admin privilege in the kernel. So it gives the container everything. It's essentially disabling all benefits of Docker security. So you almost never want to do that in production. You really just want to do that for troubleshooting or when you just need to figure out how something needs to work. The proper way to do it is to use capabilities, which allows you to granularly add a list of different permissions, like permissions to the networking, and just give it networking privileges without all the other privileges. And so now some of those are supported in Swarm with the latest release. You can actually look up that stuff in the release notes. If you probably just Google around for Docker Swarm 2010 release notes or something, you'll probably find that. And yeah, so I absolutely encourage you to look into those because almost in every case I've looked at tools that are like, oh, just use privilege mode. Well, that's an easy way out. That's the cheating way out. Like there's definitely a way to do a lot of those things without completely giving it admin privileges. Usually you just add a capability. Usually it's networking related or something like that. And you just need to add that one little capability. So yes. How can I use Ubuntu for WSL2 and log into Docker Desktop for Windows? So when you're in WSL2, I'm not sure what you're asking about how. Yes, you can do this. So when you have to enable WSL2, plenty of guides out there on how to do that. And then you install Ubuntu from the Windows Store, and that will give you the Ubuntu shell. It actually starts up the VM in the background. You have to make sure it's a WSL2 VM in the background, not WSL1. You can even change the default so that all these Unix or Linux things that you create, or because you can do multiple ones. Like you can do an Ubuntu one and a CentOS one. You can install all those from the Windows Store, and then you go into Docker Desktop and you tell the Docker Desktop settings. There's an option right in Docker Desktop that says use WSL2, and you can even tell it which of the WSL2 VMs that you want it to use, like just one of them, all of them, the default one, and I just check them all. So I enable it for all of them. So that way, when I just bring up the shell for that thing, my Docker automatically works. It's automatically running inside that VM. Your second question was, my courses on Udemy, do they cover beginners like me? Yes, they are designed for beginners. Beginners to containers, not beginners to development, not beginners to sysadmin. But if you're already doing those kind of jobs, you understand networking in the cloud a little bit, you understand the command line, you understand a little bit of Linux, like some basics. You have to know all that stuff. But once you know that stuff, then you can start with Docker Mastery. And yes. Trivy is also a good scanner. Yes. So Trivy is actually my favorite open source scanner. That's like purely open source. I'm not sure that Sneak is like there are open source components. It's a little weird. Like, what is open source in some of these cases? I don't necessarily think you have to use an open source scanner, but obviously, if you hit Sneak limits and you don't want to buy their product, which adds a bunch of other stuff and gives you a bunch of dashboards and stuff like that, then you could use Trivy. And Trivy has been for a while my favorite open source scanner, and they do different things. I actually, honestly, my recommendation is run both, because security scanners have opinions. They're opinionated. The value sometimes in these scanners is that they are opinionated. So in the case of Sneak, they're weighing in on what they think the approach to those CVEs should be, and because not every critical vulnerability is patched or can be patched, or some of these things that are they've been CVEs for years with no patches, right? So there's some opinion to it. So that's why you're going to get different results. So I always recommend you doing two. You're going to get thousands of results. If you saw my tweet the other day, this is not a knock on Sneak, but if you saw my tweet this week, I was having a short conversation with the Sneak development team because I got my weekly email from my free account on Sneak, and it said this. It told me that in my repos on GitHub alone, I have 5,503 vulnerabilities in my code, or in someone else's code that I have cloned. So at this point, I don't do, what am I going to do? There's only like 2 or 3 repos that I really work on making sure that they don't have vulnerabilities. Everything else is just like, best effort. So my recommendation was actually that these emails just need to say this, right? Or that, or maybe this, when I'm ignoring all of these emails, because Docker Hub can, GitHub sends them now with the Dependabot, right? So you can scan with GitHub. I scan with Sneak. I get both of them, and I get them for all the organizations I'm a part of. So in total, there's tens of thousands of bugs in the software that I have access to. So it's just, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Where do you get the list of capabilities? I would say documentation. Look in the docs. Look at the -- help in the command line. I'm not actually sure it's probably not, now that I think about it, in the help, the command line. But I would expect there to be in the documentation. If not, ping me if you can't find them in the documentation or the command line. Then you could search the source code on GitHub, or ping me and I will ask someone at Docker that question, because that list should be fairly available. I don't know if it's truly the list and if the list is formatted. So you're showing me the man page list. I'm not exactly sure if everything on that list is supported, but it could be. And I'm not sure if there's actually a translation between what Linux considers them and what Docker considers them. I think there was actually some really good effort a couple years ago in the security team at Docker to make those capabilities easier to understand for mere mortals, because that list can be very confusing, and a lot of them have unintended consequences in terms of permissions. So there was an effort, and it never saw the light of day, but it was basically to create a standard that would make it like for Docker users to understand sort of like 5 levels of capabilities or something, and that those would translate into official Linux capabilities. So that was a really cool idea. I was totally in support of that, and it never happened, unfortunately. Because honestly, most people either just run standard Docker run, or they do privilege. You're a rare individual if you're focusing on individual capabilities. You're probably working in a big company, or you're just super smart, working on the edge of the stuff. Because most people are just trying to get this thing to work at this point, and they're just trying to move their app forward, and they feel like Docker, because the state of Docker security by default is already better, that they feel like a Docker run is just good enough. If it works, then you don't have to add capabilities anyway. Eric's throwing down on the links. Let's look. It's weird. I can't. We have the mad pay. So yeah, so that's showing Eric, that's showing seccomp, but that is different than capabilities. Let's see. Yeah. Um, yeah, so this is a really interesting read on the security homepage. I'm going to throw that in the chat. So it's breaking down how Docker deals with capabilities. So there's capabilities, there's seccomp, there's AppArmor, there's SE Linux. Like all these things are largely overlaps of the same different approaches to the same problem. So they said so by default Docker drops all capabilities except those needed. And it's pointing at code, and I think this is the list I looked at last time, and an allow list instead of a deny list approach. So it whitelists by default, and then you can see the fullest capabilities in the man pages. So yeah, it actually takes us there, and so this is the list by default that every run gets. And then I guess they're saying there's no translation. So that's one of the problems is you've got to interpret what these do for what you need and to add to this list. So this is the list we all get out of the box. And then thank you for that list, Archimedes. Yeah, so you can, netadmin is basically raw networking. Sysadmin is basically everything. Yeah, there was another one that was common, but I can't remember which one it is. NetAdmin. I mean, basically, my understanding is giving it sysadmin is essentially the same as -- privilege, but someone smarter on the Linux kernel may know better than me on that. So if you this is the only one that works for you, then you might as well use privilege in my mind. But yeah. Yeah, I'll start with cap sysadmin and work my way down. Yeah, so I wouldn't start with cap admin. I would if it was me. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly we're working on. If this is probably a networking thing, but the thing is that like if it's a regular, it's just actually sad to me if this is true, Archimedes. If you're trying to use an app, and I don't know the app you're using. I know you mentioned it, but I don't know what it is. And the only documentation on the internet or the way the internet tells you to solve this problem is to use privilege mode. That's sad to me because that really should never be. Like for any product that's out there that needs more capabilities, someone surely that has run this in Docker has figured out which exact capabilities it needs. And it's a shame that that's not on the internet somewhere. Because really, I don't think anything truly needs privilege mode. Unless it's like a thing that's literally trying to monitor everything on your computer. It's some sort of security tool that has to have the highest privileges in the whole system. And in those cases, yes, that's probably what it needs to have. So, all right, let's get back to the new stuff. So I think I covered everything in Docker Desktop 3.0. There are probably other things, like the GUI. They added the GUI. They completely improved CPU and let's just say CPU and memory improvements. CPU, I/O, and memory improvements galore. Yeah, so tons of that stuff, right? And then the Docker Desktop GUI that we have that they've continually added features. Now you can actually look at compose stuff in there. You can see you can start and stop compose. You can actually bring up the logs all in the GUI in the Docker Desktop dashboard. In Kubernetes, my list was a little light, and I apologize because I didn't actually go through the release notes today. I went with those release notes on each release, but I was trying to rack my brain, and of course, to me, my memory is we completely changed the run command in 1.18. We now have slower releases. We're not releasing quarterly. I believe it's now down to 3 releases a year, which I'm a fan of. Another thing was dash server. Let's see. There's an option. It's like server run, server diff. I'm forgetting the option now. I'm just gonna say server diff. Server diff works. I think that's an enhancement, like it was in 118 or 119. So that basically when I want to compare my YAML to what's running, it actually does it on the server side, so it compares it against custom resources, stuff like that. I actually have a bug in my Kubernetes course where the way that we used to do it in 1.17 doesn't work anymore, and I've put a note in there, but I need to actually change the video to make that command different. We now have the kubectl debug commands, so there's a bunch of stuff under debug that is in 120, which I am interested in. Some of that stuff is not available, like the ephemeral containers and stuff, unless you turn on new other beta or alpha features. But the debug came out of beta. And then in 2021, that was the big announcement that you will no longer need. Well, first off, we no longer need to use the Docker daemon under Kubernetes. We can now directly talk to Containerd. So that's the good news. Like, we don't need the Docker shim and Docker in between Kubernetes and Containerd. It doesn't change a thing. It's just extra stuff we didn't need. And Docker created Containerd solely to extract the stuff out of Docker that was just the bare bones API stuff for Kubernetes. Like, that was the whole purpose. So now that we've done that, you don't need Docker anymore in a Kubernetes cluster. And most people never run the Docker command line once they've installed Kubernetes anyway. So there are a few edge cases where there are people that are using Kubernetes to build stuff on the Docker engine that Kubernetes is running, but I am not a fan of that. Like, I feel like you're mixing the waters there, and you really want your Kubernetes clusters to manage all the containers. If you want to run things on Docker for like Docker build, there are now build tools like BuildKit and Builda that will build images for you that you don't necessarily need to run a Docker daemon on the host. So I'm much more a fan of that. I don't like muddying the waters by managing Kubernetes containers outside of Kubernetes, right? So I'm not a big fan of doing Docker command lines on a Kubernetes server. So anyway, so yeah, that was a thing that will happen next year, but we got the announcement this year. So also, as a part of that, Mirantis said they will now support the Docker shim going forward. They're actually going to create a new one, I think. And so if you still want to use Docker under Kubernetes, which I don't think you need to. I don't need to. If you still need to use Docker underneath for various reasons, you can, and Mirantis will support it. So thank you for supporting the community on that. I think that the noise on that one got lost a little bit because it was days after the big announcement that they mentioned it on their blog. So, yeah, privilege mode. Yeah, Jonas is saying privilege mode is just a habit too. Yeah, that's definitely a habit issue. It's also the easy button, right? That there's a reason that thing exists, is to make it easy when you're just doing stuff locally. You're just debugging, testing, whatever. You just dash privileged if it doesn't work, and then it now works. Hey, that's great. But I don't recommend its use in production if you can avoid it. How many containers can I run on Docker Engine or on Docker 20 version? Do we have maximum and minimums for containers to run, like support resource, GPU, memory, hard disk? No, there are no guides on this because Docker is just one app on your server. What's going to matter is what you're running in your container, right? Docker doesn't really add a lot of resources use on top of your apps. So it's really about what do your apps need. That's how much your server. If you want to run 1,000 containers, your server better have enough resources for 1,000 containers, and then a little bit extra for all the Containerd runtimes and the runc runtimes, and then the Dockerd if you're running that. So I would say that it behaves just like a normal system without Docker in general, especially when you're talking about a real production server, when you have, like 32 gig of RAM and SSDs and stuff like that for real machines. I don't remember the last time we had to augment our approach strictly for running Docker. Now, what ends up happening is in a real production system, you've got monitoring tools, you've got logging tools, you've got security tools, and all these things start having to be run inside of containers as well. And because of containers, you run more of those. Like you tend to run sidecars more often, which is like running an app for every container, like a security tool that you maybe have to run, or maybe you're using a log tool that picks up all the logs and ships them somewhere else. And or maybe you're doing proxies with a service mesh, and that in a lot of cases will cause you to have a proxy per app, per container app on your servers. So that's all that stuff that adds bloat. It's not really Kubernetes or Docker itself, especially Docker. And if you run containerd without Docker, like in Kubernetes, you have even less to worry about because containerd uses less resources than Docker. But I've never had to adjust my deployment specs because it was the app, and now it's the app in Docker. Like that didn't make a difference, really. Not unless it was a tiny little Raspberry Pi or something like that. It was like the tiniest instances on EC2. But it's a good question. But you can disable the multipass GUI with multipass set client GUI auto start to false. Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think that must be when you're installing it with some sort of GUI installer. I don't know. I never even knew that was a thing, and I've never seen the GUI on my system unless I manually started it. But yeah, that's cool. You can use the command line to change that. At least I don't remember doing that. Maybe I did that when I first started it. Maybe I forgot. But yeah, I guess if your GUI is running and you don't want it there, that's a cool tool, a cool little command line there. So you're able to change the config through the command line for a GUI. All right, let's get back to it. So those of you that are paying as probably more attention to me than me on Kubernetes, what else for you was on this list for 2020? And I'm not talking about little things like the version of a spec for a resource changed paths, like something left the miscellaneous or whatever resource scope and went to some other scope. Like those are just subtle configuration differences. But I know I think it was this year we released officially the V1 of Ingress, but and so technically there was a few added features there to Ingress. So maybe that should be on there. I think that was 2020. Yeah. And now I'm not talking about all the Kubernetes tools, right? Like there's Kubernetes, there's Helm, which, Helm 3 came out last year. I had to check because I couldn't remember when it came out. So it wasn't a major release this year. But Ingress released and added view YAML spec. Yeah, annotations. So a few little things in Ingress. There was probably some better command line fix stuff, but I couldn't remember all of them. So anyway, anyone remembering that stuff, let me know. All right, now before we get to the wish list, Docker Hub. So we have new storage and pull limits. Sad face. No more free lunch on Docker, which I don't blame them. Hey, they got to pay the bills. But we're all coming up with ways to solve that problem. Either we just pay them $5 a month or $7 a month, or you use caching. More caching is better. It makes things faster anyway. So caching is a win, or just using another registry. There are so many registries now. Sneak scanning of images in Hub. So you can now turn that on if you're paying, and then you can see that stuff in official images now, which had been removed years ago because they had an internal tool years and years ago. That was like at least 2 years ago, I think. And then they took it away. And then now you can email Docker for support if you pay for their Docker subscription. So yay, awesome. So for me, the ones that so here's the thing. Like my big asks aren't actually that big for 2021. Other than the continued march of Kubernetes getting easier and the clouds and the distributions making it easier to deploy and update Kubernetes, I don't have a lot of big asks on Kubernetes other than maybe could we possibly get like Ingress v2, where it's more features into Ingress so that we weren't tempted to use all these third-party resources. Let's get some more stuff in Kubernetes out of beta, like the ephemeral containers. I guess you can't think of anything else right now. Stuff like that. And in Docker, I had two things that I thought of. So the first one was what everybody kind of assumes we should just be able to do today that we can't do. I want to be able to Docker compose up to Kubernetes. And Docker knows this. The captains are all asking for this. It seems weird at this point in the ecosystem that we don't have this. We all know the history of why, how we got here, but that to me is irrelevant. Like how we got here, all that stuff. But yes, I would love to Docker compose up to ACI, ECS, Google Cloud Run, DigitalOcean, Droplets, whatever, Heroku. I want to Docker compose up images to Heroku. Like, it'll be amazing. I feel like that's a little bit like we're building the old Docker Machine thing where Docker Machine had all these drivers, and one of the hard things with Docker Machine was to maintain all those drivers for all the different places. But that's one of the reasons Docker Machine is going away, is that the idea of setting up individual VMs and then manually installing Docker and then manually adding containers, that's what Docker Machine does. That's been replaced. We now have either orchestration, which Docker Machine doesn't do, or we have all these cloud ways to deploy your containers. So you can deploy containers through Docker Compose Up to ECS, which is technically an orchestration tool, and that's much more production ready than spinning up a manual EC2 instance with Docker Machine. Like, that's way better. So ACI is a little bit different with Azure's ACI. That's a single server with containers running on there. It's not orchestration, but you can now do that with Docker Compose Up. So we're getting sort of this is to me like Docker Machine 2.0. And so for those of you that are diehard, you love Docker Machine, I don't blame you because it was a really easy way. But let's move beyond that. Let's move beyond the idea of making a machine, spinning up, because now you have to patch that machine. You have to do all these things to that machine. And I'm tired of messing with machines. I would rather play with Linux servers when I want to, not because I have to. For business stuff, really, I just want to deploy software and have it running and stay secure and keep updated. That's really just what I want. When I want to play with Linux, that's a separate thing to me. So I don't want to have a bunch of hobby servers that I have to maintain or business servers for every single client. They're like that I now have to patch monthly with a manual patching process. I just don't want that anymore. I'm so tired of that. Anyway, so that's what we have now. So I want to do this to Kubernetes. Any. Just give me super basic. It doesn't have to support all of the things. It just needs to support what Compose already supports. Because there are tons of people on Swarm that Swarm is enough for them. It doesn't need, but maybe a little bit of ingress support, because that's how you publish in Kubernetes, sort of. And then we maybe need a little bit of augmentation for the different storage drivers, maybe, or something with CSI. But other than that, like, Compose should be able to work. We've done it before. Docker has at least 2 tools that do this already, and we just need to get that into Docker. And so that's my wish 1. Who agrees with me? Thumbs up if you agree with me on this. I really just want this to be the thing I do until it gets too complicated, and now I have to be a kube control person, right? But if you're a developer and someone's like, just deploy to Kubernetes, that's a really hard step to go from, I know how to use Docker on my machine, to, okay, now there's this Kubernetes server. How do I get my app there? I have a Compose file. What do I do? Like, there's 1,000 things they have to do there. They have to learn kube control. They have to learn the manifest YAML. They can optionally learn a conversion tool, but they still have to convert and then maintain that. Like, it's not pretty. So a show that we're going to do next year, I don't have the guest list yet, but I already know who I'm going to invite. And we're going to talk about this. And we're going to spitball on ideas, talk about hopefully the future of things, look at existing tools that kind of do this, but they're still not in Docker. By the way, Docker Captain Michael Irwin had a post recently that I know got put into my Discord. This is another shout out to the Discord crew. Wherever that's at, I have too many tabs open. in Discord. Someone was poking to, I don't know if it's in here. Okay, nope. I'm gonna put up something on Erwin's post. Nope. 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 Can't find it. But somewhere in there, we had a post from Michael Irwin, and that described how he automates compose going to Kubernetes clusters, and it works for him. But it's not. It's multi-steps to set up, and there's a process. So what I want is for us to do this. Thanks for the thumbs ups, everybody. I hear you. All right. So my next item on my wish list is, I'm going to put it on the screen. Oops. Paste and match style. Oops. That's not what I wanted. Doggone it. Almost there. Almost there. Boom. All right. So this is a little wordy. So let's talk about this one. Yeah. So I want a way to build official Docker images. Now, when I say official, like all the images are compliant. There's plenty of tools that can build images. But Docker still, out of the box, yes, it can be rootless, but it can't be daemonless. I can't do a Docker build without the daemon. And that's just an extra step that I don't want to have to take anymore. And we have tools that can do this. And most use cases work with this. I would like my CI tools to use this process, because BuildKit is this new wonderful way to build container images. You can use it as a separate CLI. It does exist. But it then requires you to, one, you have to know about BuildKit. You have to go find BuildKit. You have to download BuildKit. It's not in the default install. It's not provided by Docker as an easy mechanism for building. But it's an amazing tool. And so my next wish list, hopefully Docker's listening, is that we get an official image that I can just basically run BuildKit in the image, or it's also in the Docker image, and it's in Docker Desktop. All the things. Like if I install Docker engine on a server, I get BuildKit out of the box. I should have that as a separate binary. That way, I can finally just use the same BuildKit build. Like that should be the command I type when I don't have a daemon. The Docker command line assumes I have a daemon. There could technically be a Docker CLI option that doesn't try to talk to the daemon. So I could maybe do a Docker build -- like foreground. I'm trying to think what the right option would be there. So maybe you could do that, and it would use the BuildKit CLI on the machine and not talk to the engine itself. There's that idea. That might muddy the waters a little bit, so we might have to, just use the BuildKit command. But regardless, I just want to be able to say, put BuildKit on that CI server, like a Jenkins server. I don't want to have to worry about, do I do Docker in Docker? Do I have to do bind the socket for Docker? How do I run the Docker daemon already in a container for Jenkins? Like, it's just too complicated for most people. Like, it's a process for them to figure all those things out. And if I just said, hey, download this tool, just do, just do a curl of this binary from GitHub, and then do BuildKit, or it's already, if install Docker, it's already there. Like, but it doesn't run as a daemon. That's it. It's super simple. Those are my only two wish lists. I want to compose up to Kubernetes. I want to build without a daemon. And I feel like that is going to help a whole lot of the developer workflow, getting from you on your machine with code or with apps that you need to put into CI and into production. I also would like some sort of, if I'm going to do a big ask, is we get some sort of GitOps approach with Docker. How can we have Docker offering GitOps out of the box? How can the Docker command line or the Docker desktop say, hey, would you like to have this thing tested in GitHub or in Docker Hub automatically with your tests maybe the npm test command, right? Or whatever your app uses, the standard testing. And would you like that automatically put in there and then set up, and then tell us where you're, we'll use a tool of choice, like partner with a tool, partner with Argo, and integrate Argo so that it'll just do that for us. And then we can basically say, Docker, ship it. And Docker will then, do the GitOps thing, and then use the context like the ACI and the ECS or whatever other context we have for all of our endpoints. And we'll then just do that instead of this shipping from my machine without going through proper Git tooling and CI tooling. Like the fact that Docker keeps skipping the CI problem and forcing us all to either just push containers to servers or solve that huge problem in the middle, like that's a big problem to solve. And I feel like 2021 could be the year that we work on that on Docker. So that's my stretch goal. I have a stretch goal. I'm going to talk to them about it soon. Maybe we'll do something on that on the show in 2021. All right. So before I get to the questions, while we're talking in questions, because we're past the hour, what shows did I not do in 2020 and 2019? Because this show has been going on for 2 years every week. What shows do you want to see in 2021? What should I put on the list? And I will write these down as you type them. Show wish list from the crew. So you tell me, what did I not cover? And of course, some of these I may have already covered, and I will just tell you that there's a show on this YouTube channel, and you can go hopefully find it. Let me go scroll back a little bit. Yeah, Paul said, see, here's the mindset, Paul. This is really interesting. I don't see the point of Docker Compose up to cloud, surely. This is for development. Develop locally, and then your CI/CD takes care of running containers. So this is assuming you have CI/CD that can run containers. Most people in their adoption of containers then have to completely revamp their CI to think about it in container ways, right? So that's a really hard project to do for most people. So Docker is using the easy button right now. I don't blame them, but they're not that these things are easy, but they're skipping that part. So yes, the way that Docker's communicating this Docker Compose up for ACS, ACI, and ECS, they're not saying this is the right way to do production for everyone. What they're saying is this is another tool to get your stuff into servers on the internet. They actually use the ACI option as a great way to let developers spin something up in the cloud with a single command line without having to learn another command. Because think about it. All these other tools, Azure, AWS, DigitalOcean, Heroku, they all have tools that allow you to quickly deploy something that's a sort of a one-off or a quick little shoot to the dark kind of thing. And Docker now has that too. So they're not claiming this is the right workflow for everyone. What I'm saying is let's start on that. Let's start solving and whittling that down. It's going to take some time, and it's going to take a process, and it's never going to release and work for everyone. Because the thing about Docker is a tool that's opinionated, which means it has a way that expects you to do things. And if you don't like it, there are other tools to do it. But it has an opinion, which is for most people. It's like the 80-20 rule. It's the approach that works for 80% of the people, right? I could use tooling for air gap systems, stuff like transferring images and stuff in easy way instead of creating bash scripts to export images and re-import them after copying all of it over. All right. Air gapped. One of the things you might want to look at, there is a Kubernetes distribution. Mandy, I cannot remember the name of it. There's a Kubernetes distribution that focuses exclusively on this, and I don't know if you can use it or not, but it basically bundles up the Kubernetes deployment plus all the images and stuff all in a single deployable package. And I cannot remember what they're called. They just renamed themselves. Anyway, somebody might remember in chat, but they just rebranded the name of their company. But there was a distro that did that. So. I thought Discord was just for kids. they started as chat for Discord. Started as chat for gaming, and they're exclusive in the gaming until 2020. Once COVID happened, they were saying, "Hey, look, let's just be open community," because all these big communities were joining. For example, you can go in and join the Microsoft community, and that's like an official. It's the official, unofficial Microsoft community. These all have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in them. You can join the Reddit Apple community or the Google community, the Reddit Google community. You can jump into the Coding Den, which is one of the biggest places to get help with coding, help others with coding. There's also the PC Master Race if you're into PCMR. The Space Vims on there, like all the things. I have a bunch. I have games. I got my WoW crew, my WoW gaming, my EVE Online gaming, my Diablo gaming, like all that stuff that I do when I'm not doing containers. So there's definitely the gaming component, but there's now a lot of open communities because they have actual community management features that help with open communities, help you actually understand your growth. For example, with ours, we have all these server insights. So we just passed 1,500 people in the Discord server. Thank you, people. And all of our stats are all up. It's all good. Everybody's coming in, getting help, talking with each other. So thank you. And I'm glad that this community is starting to grow and become a place for people to practice, learn, and help each other with DevOps, because it takes practice. Honestly, I think you have to help others in this community because you learn by helping others. You need to take an hour out of your week and just come in, read what some people are doing, go check out what they're doing, help other people with what you know. And that's how I learn. That's how I become a better engineer. So anyway, yeah. Plug for the DevOps. And the way you get there, devops.fan, over there, the Discord server. Feature wish, separate caches for distinct builds. In build kit form. So, interesting, separate caches. I'm curious about the need for that. Because I know with BuildKit, with BuildX, right, you can have separate builders, but I think they all use the same cache. And then you can now ship caches, so you can push caches up to registries. Yeah, I'm interested in chat what that's about, or if you want to jump into Discord. Docker plus GitOps, yes, Docker Ops. All right, okay. So we're getting to the Jonas was a feature wish, but Saeem has got get more GitOps. Well, GitOps originally was for Kubernetes, right? Or Docker. So if we're not going to use Kubernetes, how do we get ops? Is that what you're asking for, Saeem? I think Docker Ops. Docker Ops. Let's just make that a thing. GitHub Actions. All right. There's an official Docker GitHub action. Service meshes. Okay, so we have not done a service mesh show. Actually, no, that's not true. We have done service mesh shows. So check out any with Lee. In fact, I'm just going to try it. Let's see what happens on the YouTubes rather. If I go to YouTube and let's see, Bret Fisher service mesh. I'm going to put service mesh in quotes. Let's see what we find there. All right, so here's some shows, right? This is last summer. I had Betty on the show. We talk about service mesh with Solo.io. And then I also have several shows, one of them with Lee Calcote, sorry. And Lee runs a whole community on service mesh. And we talk about that. He's a CNCF ambassador, Docker captain. So we also talk about that on that show. So I think that's about it. I think everything else is not mine. Oh, no, that's not true. We in Traffic 2.0, when it was released, I did mention that there is this service mesh, or it's just called mesh from Traffic, the company Traffic, which is a mesh that I like because it's approachable. It's a single engine per server. It's a single proxy per server, not a single proxy per deployment. And I like that. It's very minimal. Anyway, I talk about it, but we don't really cover it much, so I wouldn't recommend that one. So service meshes. So more service meshes. COVID-free year. I cannot do a wish. I can't help with that. I can't help with a COVID-free year. But Linkerd from beginning to end. Well, there's already a course on that. We just mentioned it. So any courses like this that drop for free, I probably won't do that myself. I will probably take some of the learnings from that and try to turn it into like a quick couple videos. But I don't know. Also, the problem with service mesh is there's not really a clear winner, so it's kind of hard. You can't do a course on all of them. They're all different. So you kind of need to stick to each one as a course, and that would be hard. But I'll put Linkerd. Maybe we can have someone from that Linkerd team on there as a interim. Ingress for Docker. So Ingress for Docker is definitely going to be Traffic is my preferred because it just works, and it doesn't have. You don't have to solve the whole entire problem. If you're the problem is like when you say Docker, are you talking about Docker Swarm or Docker, like Docker Run? Because an orchestrator requires a different approach to Ingress. So I'm just going to assume Docker Run, not Docker Swarm. So that's going to be Traffic. Yeah, Traffic 2.0 is my recommendation for that. All right. Hello, Ben Haverson. Best practices for DevOps. Best practices. Okay. A cookbook with 4 to 5 canned solutions: Dev, CI/CD, prod, monitoring, logging. Okay. My dog versus cat repo did some of that, but you're right. It doesn't integrate CI/CD, mostly because, and maybe what we can do, and here's the problem, right? CI/CD, there's 1,000 products. Every team I work with is using a different product. Some people are using Jenkins. Some people are using GitHub Actions. Some are Travis. Some are Circle CI. Some are Jenkins X. Some are using Code Deploy. It just Azure DevOps. Like there's so many tools, and I guess maybe 50% out there. I think I saw a stat from CNCF that 50% is using Jenkins. The problem is there are multiple ways to do it in Jenkins, and there are multiple add-ons for Jenkins. And I prefer the pipeline approach that where you don't just do it all in the GUI. So even just picking the CI tool. So I think the only one that I think I'm going to be able to do is maybe one way with Jenkins, and that's probably going to be a pipeline, like the simplest, easiest pipeline way in Jenkins, if there's nothing else, like the most modern Jenkins approach. And then 2 is GitHub Actions. I think other than that, you'll probably be able to figure out whatever your tool needs to be to do those 2 things. So those are the 2 that I think I'm willing to do, because they're also the 2 that I probably have the most experience with. Travis CI, not Travis, sorry, but CodeShip and I did do Travis, but that's like 5 years ago. And Circle CI, I have experience in those as well, but they're less used, and their approaches are very similar to these other approaches. So if you looked at the CI/CD, if you looked at the stats with the CNCF survey 2020, here's an interesting thing about CI/CD. Oops. Where's okay, here we go. The 3 most used CI/CD tools with people. Now, this is a CNCF survey, which means these are people that almost always are doing Kubernetes. They know about Kubernetes. They are well invested in the community. CNCF is this modern nonprofit organization. So, most people I work with don't even know what that is, right? So you got to realize that these are already the tip of the spear people. These are not the people that are just now learning about what Docker is, right? So for them, 53% are Jenkins, 36% are GitLab, and 20% are GitHub Actions. So if I was going to do 3, it might be those. but I would probably do GitHub Actions first because I feel like that's going to be continuing to grow as they can, like, it's hard to deny GitHub. The power of GitHub is hard to escape. So it's got a lot of gravity around it. So I might even do that one first before I do Jenkins because it's going to be easier, right? You don't have to deploy a tool to then use it. You can just have a sample. So that's a great idea. I'm going to do full sample pipeline of code repo to CI to CD to servers, right? Like that's a full sample, 1 or 2. I'll start with 1, right? All right, we're going to do that. What is the Discord channel, Steve? It is up there, devops.fan. Go right there, devops.fan. Rancher. So we can have Rancher back on the show. So I made for Rancher, I have had Darren on twice, a year ago, and then just 2 months ago. So go to Bret.live, and you can look into YouTube and just look for Darren Shepard, Bret Fisher. We go through all the Rancher stuff. We don't go through like deployment stuff. So if you want that, we can certainly do that. Let me know in the chat if you want. If you want specifically like a Rancher deployment example, I probably could have someone on the show to do that. I think I'm already thinking of an idea for that. So let me put on there Rancher deployment show. Yeah, I got an idea for that one. Oh man, I got a good idea for that one, for the Rancher. I'm thinking some dual stream fanciness. GitOps for Docker Swarm tool. Yes, I'm still using Swarm. So the problem is with this particular approach is there isn't one. Like, there just isn't one. I mean, the biggest thing that sucks about Swarm right now is there's no API to talk to stacks. I can't stack deploy through the API remotely. So whatever we would have to do is we would have to come up with something ad hoc, and it wouldn't be a complete GitOps solution. But GitOps for Docker and Swarm. So I'll just add that to the list at the top. But because I feel you, like someone who wants to use Swarm, like that's a pain point. Maybe something with GitHub Actions combined with the new Swarm jobs. Maybe we can work out something that audits and basically make sure you don't have drift. Because that's the real thing with GitOps is you want to make sure that the two work and are matching, and then monitoring, logging, and distributed tracing with both Docker and K8s. Oof. All right. That's a big ask. That's basically all of the things. So let's we've done okay, so this year we have done logging. We already had EKS logging on here. Not EKS, sorry. ELK logging. We had a show just on that this year. We had a show, this is all on the YouTube channel. We had a show on distributed tracing, observability. At least 2, if not 3 shows on that stuff. Did we have a monitoring? I'm not sure if we did one this year. We did one last year, but I'm not sure if we had a specific monitoring tool. Like we didn't have a Prometheus show. So maybe we should have a Prometheus show. Wishlist, bring more guests into the shows. I'd say 70% of shows this year, 80% of shows this year were guests. So do you mean like 100% of shows are guests? Like never have me just by myself? Or do you mean more people per show? Because that can get a little tricky. Typically, we only get like 1 or 2 people. And then if you get more than that, then it becomes too hard to manage and it turns into like an event. But I hear you. Okay, you want more shows. Wish list storage. For the show? I'm not sure. Oh, okay. I mean, what is this wish list for? Is this wish list for features? Because we're talking about people on my show. What do you want to have in the show? What is this Notes app? This is Notion. check out Notion. It's one of my favorite. It's my favorite tool. I use it all day long. It's amazing. It supports Markdown. It supports code, databases, web views. It's like, what if Google Sheets met Markdown, met Google Docs, met I don't know. It's a super tool. It's very cool. I use it every day. Look up Notion. That's what the Note app is called. Storage, Rook and Ceph. So we had a show on Rook. Talked about Rook. I think. I know we talked about Rook, but I feel like it was a whole show. Maybe it was just part of a show. Yeah, Biker says yes, 2 cookbooks, Jenkins and GitLab. Yeah, I haven't done a heavy amount of. I'll be honest, I don't have any clients that use GitLab, and surprisingly over the years, not a single one of them. But so I've only played with it. I've never used it in a production scenario. I know a lot of people do. I know it's popular, but that's going to take some work for me to do the GitLab one. So if I did that one, it would probably be last. Tekton. Okay, yeah. Let's throw that Tekton on there. Yeah, we had a lot of the VMware projects this year. We had at least 3 VMware projects on the show this year. We did not do Tekton, which I think that's VMware, right? K3D. So yeah, we can do K3D. Have not had that on the show. We talked about all things K3s or keys. We had all that stuff on at the beginning of the year with Alex Ellis. I will probably invite Alex Ellis back. He's a CNCF ambassador, and he came back on the show in the beginning of this year, and so I'll probably have him on the show next year because he supports a lot of open source projects, including OpenFaz, Ketchup, or Keys Up, or however you want to. I think it's Ketchup. He pronounces it Ketchup. And K3D, K3S. Those are like all things that he works on. Raspberry Pis, that sort of thing. Rancher just released Harvester. Oh, let's talk about that. I didn't know about that. Either I forgot already or I did not know. They put it on their front page. Okay, new intro. Open source hardware converged infrastructure software. So, open source alternative to vSphere and Nutanix. Okay. Wow. This is not what I was thinking it was, because I had Darren on the show, and one of the things we wanted to talk about was getting stuff from local to production and like compose and all that stuff. And he was saying that they were working on something. So this is cool. I'm gonna have to check this out later. Thanks for the update. I did not know. All right, Terraform and AWS Cloud. All right, so we haven't done. We haven't done a Terraform for containers show. So I can put that on the list. Oh, Tekton is Google. Thanks, Eric. Tenenzu? Is that the one I'm thinking? I'm thinking I'm confusing it with that. Tanzu. That's what I'm thinking of, is the Tanzu product. Yeah, Tekton. Let me look that up. That's funny. Oh, that's the CI/CD pipeline thingy. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah, and see, this is I love the future of this stuff. Here's the problem. people need to, like, there's a circular learning problem with stuff like this. Like, I get why people are doing it. The problem is that this is not for people to adopt when they're new to containers and they're just getting ready to deploy Kubernetes, right? Like, this is for people that know Kubernetes and now want to run their CI on that, right? At least that's how I understand it. Because I looked into it originally, and the workflows that I'm often dealing with customers is people that are new to container deployments. So telling them that, oh yeah, in order to run containers, you also want to change your CI/CD solution to completely run in containers as well. Like, that's a non-starter. You can't do that to people. So I typically say, okay, we're going to change as little of CI as possible. You're basically just going to build containers in your existing CI, and then you're going to ship the images, and then we're going to put them in the orchestration or whatever that might be, right? So the problem is we never get to these kind of completely revamping your CI solution. I think for small teams that are on the leading edge and that they're able to grok all these things, like they know Kubernetes, they get containers, and they're now like tired of their old CI tools and they want to implement. I could be totally wrong, but yeah, at Jenkins X, like, I don't have any companies running Jenkins X because if they're running Jenkins, they're running old Jenkins. They're not trying to do Jenkins X, and I think the only people that are interested in Jenkins X is people that are interested in Jenkins, that they already have Jenkins. Yeah. So, all right. Let me scroll up. Yeah, K3D, demonstrate with Swarm Prom. Yeah. Yeah, the Swarm already has, so yeah, if you're on Swarm and you're interested in the monitoring and all that stuff, you look up Swarm Prom. I have mentioned Swarm Prom's repo many times in this show. It's probably the resource for setting up monitoring, not logging, but monitoring on Swarm. Waypoint, honestly, Waypoint is another tool. I'd love to try it, but again, we can't. I need to have someone on the show that knows it, because I won't have time to learn it. There's so many tools that it just not one person can't learn all these tools and teach courses and do a job, right? Like, so a lot of these people, it's a matter of let's find a Waypoint person and have them on the show. HashiCorp. I don't think we've had any major shows about a HashiCorp product, which is a shame. Like, they make some great stuff. So, I'm not exactly sure. I looked into Waypoint when it first was announced, but it was yet another thing. It's like, oh, we don't have enough standards. Let's create another standard. Like the saying goes with HKCD. So, Tecton, persistent storage and Swarm. Yeah, Wishlist. That's Morantis is supposedly working on that. Tanzu branding. Let's see. Beyond container, what's next? Container is just you building a Docker file. The future's already here. But some may say, oh, it's serverless. But serverless is, to me, there is no standard deployment process for serverless yet. And for years, I have been saying that the container is the standard deployment process for serverless. Hence, just now, Lambda is now supporting container images as a deployment artifact. All along, like OpenFaz, another serverless product, container images was a deployment object. Like, we all, I don't think we should throw away the container world of tooling simply because we have these other ways of deploying apps, right? If you're in some cases, like with Heroku and Netlify and some of these other things, sure, you can get away with never using an image. You can skip the whole Docker thing, but the world is continuing to standardize on the OCI image as the deployment object. And I think I was saying this, I think like 4 years ago when I would speak at conferences, I was saying, imagine the future, all your server software is all going to be images. I still think that's the future. People are like a consistency. We need consistency in this world of 1,000 freaking tools a minute. So one thing would be nice, like we've all started to standardize on Git. That's one thing that we could all start to standardize on. And then the pull request became another workflow standard that we're all starting to get used to, the idea of pull requests. People do it different ways, but ultimately it's a pull request type of workflow for getting your code updated. We're now seeing Git ops because Git is such a prevalent thing, and it's not so much that it's the Git command line. It's more like it's the code versioning way of infrastructure. That is now becoming a thing, right? But what I still don't want to see is 50 different ways to deploy things. I'm not looking to go back to makefiles and all these various ways. So either you have very bespoke tools that know your one app and they know how to deploy that app. So like a Netlify or a Heroku or something like that. They know how to read your app's package JSON file or whatever, your manifest is for that app ecosystem and framework. Those are very niche, but we don't have anything that's generic across the industry that's consistent other than container images. So to me, the future is images. Serverless will be deploying images. Heroku deploys images now. Like that is becoming to me the one way that you can standardize your entire infrastructure on this one demarcation line, and everything before you make images, what CI you use, how you develop, whether you develop in containers or you don't develop in containers, all those can be different. But then you standardize on that deployment object artifact, and then where you deploy to doesn't matter. But if we get that one thing in the middle, all sorts of things start to happen, right? We can now scan for images. We can now build the same way. We can now deploy with the same tooling. It's just everything becomes, and all it takes is one consistency in the world. So I hope, my wish for 2030 is that we're still using the container image as the standard because it's the one thing we can all agree on. Anyway, off my soapbox. That was a great BitMonkey. That was a great topic. All right, see ya, James. Not low-hanging fruit kind of topic. Yeah. Tecton to me is like other. So it falls in the realm of like developing on Kubernetes. It's like, okay, now you're a developer. Okay, now you gotta learn containers. Okay, now you gotta learn Kubernetes. Okay, now you have to learn how to develop on containers in Kubernetes. Like that, just you have to be an what are they like the what is it? The programmer that's the 10x programmer, I think is the term I'm looking for. You have to be someone that's really on the leading edge to even grok that stuff. And most people just aren't. So, and Martin upvotes the BitMonkey thing. So yeah, beyond containers, what's next? So we could do future of containers is containers. We did that show, by the way, this year rather. We had that show as part of, we talked about it in the Docker Con, the online Docker Con. And then last year I had Kubernetes superfan Kelsey Hightower on here. And Kelsey and I, about a year ago, talked about the future of containers is running containers on someone else's stuff. And we don't have to care. We still build the image, but we don't care about the infrastructure. We've got to stop worrying about infrastructure. We need to stop caring about server updates. Like all that stuff needs to be automated and moved away. And all we care about is our images and pushing our images into some system that auto deploys them. And that, to me, the title of that is going to be "Future of Containers is your image in someone else's containers." So someone else is running them for you. You just have to make the image. Imagine if the only thing you had to worry about, regardless of what infrastructure provider your company chose, was, hey, all I need to do is take my code, get it into an image that runs in Docker, and then have a very basic compose-like file that becomes an industry standard, like the compose spec. We've talked about the compose spec here. I have hope for this. The compose spec could have a future here because it's already supported in a lot of different places. We now have it on Azure and AWS and in Docker and in Kubernetes. And it's not there yet. We're not finished. But what if the compose spec was the high-level tool that a developer, not an operator, because an operator cares about things like backups and volume storage and replication of files and all these other things that a developer doesn't care about. But if a developer could make an image Docker file, and a compose file that describes their application in basic detail so that an operator can take it and run with it, that to me is going to do a huge favor to the entire community. Because now, if any provider who's running Kubernetes as the standard can accept your Docker images and without you having to learn Kubernetes manifest, because Kubernetes manifest was never meant to be the standard. All the original founders of Kubernetes project are saying, look, we created the manifest spec as a low-level utility to be used by higher-level tooling. And so to me, the compose spec is the higher-level tooling. Now, Waypoint, maybe, there's other things that we could argue could compete with this, but there's already almost 1 million compose files on GitHub, almost 1 million. So to me, it's de facto. We just need to get it a little bit farther along so that we can say, hey, all I need as an operator is for you developers to give me a Docker file and a compose file. And if you just learn those two things, forget Kubernetes, forget about it. forget about ingress, forget about all the proxies in the service mesh and all those things. And that stuff just gets abstracted away by whoever your provider is. That's what I hope. All right. This is a long list, people. Thank you so much. Persistent storage using Swarm. We use NFS. Yeah. Okay. New. Ease of deploying Compose to Azure and AWS and the pros and cons. So this is a noob topic. So we can now do that with the Docker command line, right, Charlie? We talked about this earlier. I don't know if you were on the show earlier, but we can do the Docker Compose up, Docker space Compose, and those now can deploy to Azure ACI and AWS ECS. So the cons of that is it doesn't go through CI or through, unless you tell your CI to do that, which I guess you could. That I'm going to put that under the full sample pipeline to server kind of thing. Because here's the thing, is anything I create in 2021, if you have to manually manage a server, you're doing it wrong. I mean, 99% of us will be doing it wrong in 2021 if we're in the cloud and we're manually managing servers. That means EC2, right? That means if you're not using Fargate, you're probably doing it wrong. If you're not using some automated infrastructure management, there's just no need for that anymore. We have Lambda now. We have Google Cloud Run. We have Fargate. We have all these tools that are coming out that manage the infrastructure for you. At most, you just need to swap out the nodes. Basically, you're rotating nodes, and the new nodes come in as patched, because a lot of these, you can do that. You can patch nodes by replacing them. So my expectation for this solution, this one I'm highlighting, is that I'm not going to expect you to be a server manager anymore. If you're having to SSH into servers and do anything on a monthly basis, to me, that's a failure of 2021. It's not necessarily someone's fault. It's just we can do better than that. we can make a better solution that doesn't require server management, and no apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, reboot. Like, that process has got to go away. Unless you like that. But most people, we'd rather work on the thing that we're working on, not on the thing that runs the thing we work on, right? Containerd and Cryo. Yeah, so we had a whole show on that. And earlier, like a month or two ago, we had a whole show on Containerd. And Cryo is basically just a smaller subset of the functionality of Containerd that you use in OpenShift. Tech inflation. Yeah, it can be really frustrating. Yeah, 100x. This is a Docker shim deprecation. I have such a problem with that word. 100x, yes. This is why Docker shim deprecation is such a non-issue for the majority. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just not an issue. Like the Kubernetes blog probably should not be for anyone other than people that are running Kubernetes clusters full-time as a day job, right? Because most of the stuff that they've talked about there is not going to be applicable to the typical Docker user, in my opinion. What about other container technologies? I've heard that K8 is leaving Docker shim behind. We already covered that. That's a show from last month. Thank you for the idea. I had a whole show on that a month ago. And I've had one of the founders, one of the core maintainers on this show, look up Phil Estes, Containerd. He's been on this show every year for the last 2 years. So we've already done that multiple times a year. Is there a way to know right now for a developer to know how much is enough about DevOps? If you don't have metrics that you're tracking for how much your servers go down and how fast a deployment takes and stuff like that, then you're not fully DevOps. you're to me, if there is no done in DevOps, but I know an organization is mature in DevOps by a couple of factors. One is if I submit a PR to their code and that process is almost completely automated with maybe one at most two human checks, and that is going onto servers in an automated way, at least test servers, if not production servers, and that no one has to type a command on a production server to update the app. Like if that happens, that's one metric to me that shows that you're mature in your DevOps because you've automated your workflows. That's automate everything. We call this in SRE world, we call this toil. You don't want toil, the things that are repetitive and that you can automate and that are easy to automate relatively to the hard things. 2, are you monitoring the time it takes for deployments? Do you know if a deployment is successful with an automated tool? Do you get metrics on how fast your deployments happen? Obviously all the monitoring of your app itself, response times in your app. A lot of those metrics are how you track your success. And if you're getting better at DevOps, then your deployments should be faster. You should have less bugs. You should go down less often. If you go down, you should recover faster. All those things indicate your maturity as a DevOps organization. So when I look at a team, I look at those. I'm like, show me your stats. Who's making the stats for you as an improved SRE organization with a DevOps mindset, right? So yeah, I'd say if you're doing all that, then you're pretty good along the trail. Notice that I didn't mention tooling, right? Because it's not about tooling. DevOps is about mindset, automation, and workflows. Statistics and metrics, those are the things you measure your success in DevOps with. You could technically do DevOps without Docker, but I don't know why you would, but you technically could. Let's see. Google SRE, namely that if a human operator needs to touch your system during normal operations, you have a bug. Exactly. So yeah, look up the word toil. Google SRE toil, TOIL. Because this is the thing that I've been focused on this year, and I will continue to focus on next year, is reducing toil in a team. And I'm working actually several themes this year with different clients. Has been, you all have Docker now, great. You have Kubernetes now, great. But you do a lot of manual stuff, and you have no metrics, and you manually deploy to servers, and you're typing commands to push stuff to update servers. Like, all that stuff needs to go away. And it's not about the right tool necessarily. There are lots of tools that do that. But if you're not approaching that, if your app isn't simple to deploy, it might be the fault of your app. If it's an old app that's pre-container and you're hard coding things in the app, it's amazing to me. We're a decade later. This isn't necessarily a rant, but if you have not read this and memorized 12-factor, it is a decade old now. In some ways, it's a little outdated, but almost exclusively, it's not wrong. It's just there are maybe slightly newer ideas around some of these things, but you cannot go wrong if you follow this. And if your app breaks the behaviors of a 12-factor app, you're going to have a hard time with DevOps. And I'm on a great project right now where we are modernizing a team's approach, because their approach is a lot of things that are not 12-factor. They hard code things in the app. They expect it only works in one type of environment on one type of Linux distribution. And it hard codes environment variables and file paths. And it doesn't properly log to std out, standard out. It doesn't log that way. It logs to a whole bunch of different files in different places. And these are all things that we learned a decade ago from Heroku and other companies that were sort of modernizing their practices. We learned these things. So go check out 12-factor. I try to read it about once a year, because it is a reminder to me about what is really important with cloud native. Cloud native is a newer evolution of ideas, but are all based on the fundamental 12-factor concepts. So you can't skip this step. You can't deploy Docker and make everything wonderful and faster and Kubernetes awesome without 12-factor. So we might do, maybe that, I'm just going to put that on the list, a whole show on 12-factor in 2021. How is it different? Are there updated concepts? Maybe I'll get a guest that has some strong 12-factor opinions and we can debate around all these things. But if you start going through the list, and these are short pages, people, that you can read this in an afternoon. It's a short, these are like 4-paragraph pages, super small pages. But if you start reading them and you realize, I don't do that. Oh man, I don't log the standard out. Oh man, my process creates a bunch of other processes and it's not isolated from them. Oh man, my application updates files inside the application source code directory on the server, which is an anti-pattern. You never want to mix downloadable separate things like persistent data. You never want to mix that inside of your app source code, and people do it. So there's all sorts of stuff here that you should take as good guidance for going cloud native, for going Kubernetes and Docker and all that stuff. Because if you skip this step, all that stuff can't help you. You will still be slowly deploying and breaking things all the time and having to fix things. It'll all happen. All right, so yeah, someone should update the 12 factors. Yeah, we need a 13th factor, which is never stop learning and never stop evolving. So yeah, I love some of these things. Clean contract for the underlying operating system. What that means is that can I install your app with a single command on Ubuntu, CentOS, and Alpine, and it works in all three, assuming that it's x64, Intel architecture, it's the same architecture. Can I deploy that? Can I install that app with one command? Because if it's more than one command, there's a simpler way for you to do it. You can make that app better. Are my logs automatically captured by any tool today that monitors? I mean, this is a decade old, and a decade ago they were saying log to standard out. Don't make your application manage its own logging and log to separate places and rotate logs and all that kind of stuff. There are other tools that do that. So all that's in here. I highly recommend it. This is a great book to just read in an afternoon, take a break, go through the pages. And it's all free. I couldn't stress it enough. But this is something I would expect someone to know before they even approach DevOps. Don't go read the DevOps handbook if you haven't read the 12-factor app page. The mindset needs to be there. You got to start thinking about your applications as not these brittle things, but that it'll work everywhere with very little effort. Set a dozen environment variables, and my app will run on any Linux. Can you do that? All right, so I have been ranting for 2 hours on all these topics, and I thank you so much for sticking around. This is going to be the last show of 2020, and we are going to start fresh next month after the new year. We're going to have guests. We're coming up with the plan now, and you've given me this fantastic list of a crazy amount of stuff that I hope we can do half of that next year. So I thank you again for all my patrons who are supporting me. You can support me by going over there to bretfisher.com or patreon.com/bretfisher. You can also get those links down below in YouTube. You can support this show there. I apologize to those that are the fans of this being the audio-only podcast version because I am months outdated with that, and I do apologize. We are working on a plan to get that back up. I'm basically hiring help as I need help to get that done. So we're going to be releasing a bunch of podcasts, updating because this show turns into a podcast on your favorite podcast network. It's just a little bit outdated. And I will see you next year on YouTube Live. So meet me in Discord chat if you want to hang out after this for the rest of the week, the rest of the year. That you get there over on that link, devops.fam. That's the Discord chat. And you can get exclusive access to certain channels in there by becoming a Patreon member. So you might want to buy me a coffee every month and hang out with us. Also, tomorrow, if you are a Patreon member that is paying for the high fivers, for the five high fivers group, tomorrow we're having basically our Christmas party. So show up tomorrow. We're going to be in Discord, and we're going to use a Discord voice room. We're actually going to be over in this room in the Discord. If you are a patron and you pay for high fivers, you will see this high fivers over here on the left. And that's a voice video room that we're going to hang out in tomorrow for an hour or so and have a little like Christmas, holiday get together. I'm going to be wearing my Santa hat and we're going to have a good time, having a little festive workplace chat. So you can do that by joining the High Fivers Club. And we do that every month. We hang out either in Zoom or in Discord in a voice video chat, and we just talk about DevOps. And we talk about what we're working on. We ask others for help, opinions on what we should do or which tool to solve a problem with, that kind of thing. So, all right, people, I'm out. Have a happy holiday, all of the things, the Hanukkahs, the Christmases, the New Year's, all the other things. And I will see you next year on this YouTube Live. Ciao.